welcome to our Alteryx Server webinar series. Let's go ahead and get started for today. And today is going to be our last meeting, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed all the journey we went through together. All right. So about me, if this is your first time with me here, I am Gabriel Vilala. I am an Alteryx specialist and part of the data meaning enablement and training team. I'm a data engineer and solutions architect. I have certifications in Alteryx Designer, Server, and on the partner level. And I have been working with Alteryx for over 4 years now. All right. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, you're more than welcome to do so. And enough about me. About Data Meaning now, we are a boutique of business intelligence consultancy founded in 2005. We provide end-to-end business intelligence solutions, and we are located in Florida, DC, New Jersey, Chicago, India, and Brazil. We provide creative services, BI services, data management, change management, delivery management, education, and training. All those services on all the platforms that you see here. Some quite nice logos, right, for our partners. So Alteryx, AWS, Azure, Snowflake. So we have some really great partners there to provide the best service possible for our clients. This has been our roadmap. So today is session number 12, all the way to the end, right? And it is going to be about how to build an API call. So it's a continuation from the last session, okay? All right, so session number 12, Gallery API, how to build the agenda. Quite simple. We are going to create a workflow that will trigger API calls, Gallery API calls to download workflows from the server. Okay, so that's going to be pretty much it, what we're going to do here today. And then I can open at the end for some Q&A. All right, so just a recap here about the macro pack. We are going to use this pack here today. And you can get that pack from the community. You can just Google search that or follow this link here. And this macro pack here, it's really nice because Alteryx developed that in order to work with the new V3 endpoints. So remember, we have the V1, V2, and V3 endpoints. And the macro pack here, it's aimed for the V3 and also doing that really seamlessly, right? Because we just drag and drop the macro, right? And we can perform authentication. You can perform get, post, create, delete really easily. Okay, so we're going to use that today. Right. And this is the process that we're going to build here. We're going to trigger a get command in order to grab a list of all the workflows. Then we're going to filter out the ones that we need. And we are going to trigger another API call to get the workflow file, the package of that workflow. All right. And then we are going to be able to download that to our local machine. So that's what we're going to do here today. Okay. All right. So let me now just show you guys again, just a recap on the gallery, where to get the information. So this is a Alteryx server that I have. If you want to see your API key and secret, you go to your profile. Then it is going to load your profile information. You scroll down, and then you're going to see the API access key and the API secret, right? So that there's where you're going to have that information. If you don't see that in here, it means that you don't have API access, as I do here. On this case, you will need to contact the Alteryx server administrator, the gallery administrator, right? and request API access. So they will need to go onto your user and enable that for you. Then you'll be able to see that information. All right. So we are going to use this here to authenticate the API call. All right. Cool. So let's jump into Alteryx now. We're going to build a workflow that will get all the workflows from the server, that like a list of all the names and IDs. Okay. And then we will select the ones that you want to download and download them. Okay. So the first thing here will be to authenticate, right? So the start of any API call is the authentication. So I'm going to use the pack, the macro pack for the v3 endpoints. So you can see here on my designer that I have the server v3 API pack there. And I'm going to use here the server API authenticate. Okay. All right. So I'm going to drag and drop that in here. And under configure, you're going to see that we need to insert the web API address, API access key, and API access secret. Okay. So the API web address, we can get that in here on the API documentation from the server, right? So within the gallery, you can click on it, and then you're going to be able to see that in here. So that here on top, right? That's the endpoint. And you can see here that we need just to replace this localhost here with the information related to my server. So on my case here, it's going to be this alteryx.data meaning.me, right? So let me remove this and this. There we go. Now I need the API access key and the API access secret. So API access key, it's this. And the API secret, let me just do that on another screen. All right. So I have both here. Then I just need to run the workflow. Really, really simple, right? You're going to see here on the result here that we have the base 64 key plus secret. So that's what the tool here uses to authenticate, to send the information. And this is the response, right? So the authorization token, you can see the bearer token there, and then the expiration. So this token here is valid for this call, right? So it's not valid like for a certain time or anything. It's valid for whenever you trigger this API call. Okay, so we were able to get the authorization token. What about now the the next request? So we need to go again onto the documentation here and explore what are the options that we have. So collections, right? Remember from the last session, these are all the endpoints for collections. If you want to manage collections, credentials, DCME connections, schedules, server connections, user groups, user and workflows. If you open up workflows, you're going to see here a few endpoints related to workflows. And this one here, v3/workflows, retrieve all workflow records, right? So this is the endpoint that we want to run first. We want to get a list of all the workflows that we have within the server. Okay. So we were able to identify what is the endpoint that we need to run. Then we just need to build our API call this endpoint here within Alteryx. Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is to change. Oh, sorry, not the slide. Change the name of the authorization token, just authorization, because that is the name that we need right after. So I'm gonna use the select tool, right, to just do a simple rename. Authorization. Okay, just because we need this as the name authorization for the next API. All right, and then I'm gonna use a formula tool to build that endpoint that I need to reach, right? So formula, I am going to create a new column. So request URL, and then the request URL will be the base URL concatenated with that endpoint that we saw on the documentation, right? So I can even copy from it. So here, right? V3 workflows. So V3 workflows. All right. So let me just run this and show you guys what is looking like here. So request URL. So we can see now that this is the base URL. So we can see here, right? The base URL, the web API address, and the endpoint there, the v3/workflows. Okay, so we are building the request URL. All right, so we have all the information here that we need. We just need to trigger this next API call, this get, right, on this endpoint here. To do that, I'm going to use the download tool. I'm going to show you guys later on how to do that using the Server v3 macro pack. But for now, I'm going to show the most common way here, which is by using the download tool. So the download tool, you're going to be able to trigger any API call with it. Okay. We just need to set it up here correctly for the URL. So the URL here is not going to be the base URL. It's going to be the request URL, the one that we just built here within the format tool, right? Let me just zoom in a little bit here. The response of the API call here is a JSON. So I'm going to output that into a string field. Headers. So what should I include within the headers of this get command here? I need the authorization, right? So this bearer token here should be included on the header. All I need to do is just enable that in here under the header, right? Authorization, and you're good to go, right? Just enable authorization on the header. The next tab you see here, payload. Here, you're going to be able to select the HTTP action. On this case, it's get, right? So we don't need to change that. But if you wanted to perform a post, put delete, right? You can do that in here. But on this case is a get action that we need. And that is described on the documentation, right? So again, get, right? You see that there? All right. I don't need to send any information here on the payload. If I wanted to do like a filter or something here, while performing this get here, I will need to build any of this here onto the payload area, right? So for example, if you want to filter by workflow name, you can insert this name parameter here on the payload and then any name there. So you're going to be able to do that in here on the payload. You can either add a new one here manually, right? So name and then value here for the workflow name that you want to search on, or you can grab a field here from the table, right? But on this case here, we don't need to do that, okay? So the only thing here that we need to change is the header to include the authorization bearer token and the proper endpoint here, so which is under the request URL. Okay. All right. So let me run this. And you're gonna see here that we got a response of code 200. So the download headers code 200. 200 means that everything went successfully. Uh, I was able to reach the server endpoint, and the server understood my request and replied accordingly. So that's the code 200. And under download data now, you're gonna see here the actual JSON, right? The response JSON here with all the information here regarding all the workflows. But this here being on a JSON format, it's not that useful for us here, right? Because we need things here to be displayed on a more tabular format. So we can just use the JSON parse tool. So let me grab the JSON parse here, run that one more time. And oh, I just need to select here the correct field, right? So the JSON field is the download data, right? So that's the field that contains the downloaded information here, right? So the response from the API call, it's under the download data. So JSON field download data. All right. So you can see here the response that we have now a table with every workflow here displayed here on multiple records. So you can see here 0 0 0 0 0 0 and then 1 1 1 1 1, right? So this first number here identifies the workflow. So this is information regarding one workflow. This is information regarding another workflow. Okay. So the challenge here now is just to parse this information. If you want to download certain workflows from this list, we will need to filter out just the ones that I need and create the next API call, which will require the ID, right? So this ID here is the ID of that particular workflow that we need to mention on the next API call if you want to download that specific workflow. Okay. So, all right. So I was able to do that in here. Now you can perform here any parsing method that you prefer. I'm gonna use regex because I personally like regex. And I'm gonna parse that JSON name column, right? I'm gonna separate here that number from what is after that. So I'm gonna be able to select based on the content of this text here that is right next to the number, right? So I'm gonna say here that I have a digit, and I'm gonna use the parse method. So capture group \d plus close parenthesis. So this is my first capture group, the digit, and then I have a dot, so \dot, and then anything after that, right? And I want to capture that as well. So another capture group, dot asterisk, close parenthesis, all right? And this is going to be under the parse method. So for each capture group that I have here, it is going to create one output column. So that's why I have here regex out 1 and 2. And you can even rename that. So this is going to be like the workflow number. I can just mention here like workflow. And this is int. It could be int 1632 or whatever there. And this other one here will be the header, right? So field header, because I will change here how this data is being displayed right after to just one record for each workflow number, right? Because now I have multiple records for the same workflow. So all the information here is in rows. I want to transform that into columns. So I will have just one single column for every workflow. All right. So if you run this, you're going to see how that's going to be transformed. There we go. So now I have it here, the workflow number and what's going to be my header. Okay. This and this for every workflow. And I have over 4,000 records here. Okay. Let me just select now the information that I need from this because I don't actually need like uh all those information, right? So I can use a basic filter here. So filter, and I'm gonna filter on the file header. And I'm gonna say that that should contain, let's see, the ID, the name, the name, and yeah, I think that that's enough here, right? Because I have the just the owner ID, date. You can filter by date later on if you want, right? So let me say here that the file header is in. So in because I want to mention multiple values, right? And I'm gonna say ID and then name, right? All right, so now I have just ID and name for every workflow. I can now use this to uh, transform, right? Transform this into a single row and have this file header here as headers. So to do that, to transform rows in columns, I'm going to use the cross tab tool. I'm going to group by the workflow number. The column headers, it's going to be the file header, right? And then the value will be the JSON value string. So this here, right? So this is contains information. The method for aggregating, I'm going to set concatenate, even though I don't have that happening, right? So the same workflow name for different headers. All right, so now a much better looking table here, right? I have the workflow number, the workflow ID from the server, and the workflow name, right? So from this point, you can select here based on the workflow name. Uh, you could, if you have selected here already, the also, right, the dates, right? You could filter by date. So that's going to depend on what you're trying to achieve. Um, let me know here what is the workflow name that I have within my studio here. So my workspace, I have one called my workflow. Okay, so let me see if I can find that specific workflow here using a filter. So I'm gonna say that the workflow name equals my workflow. Right. Oh, and there we go. I have that workflow there, right? So this workflow here, it's my workflow. It's right there. You could search by name as well, uh, of who published that, right? Because but you'd have to perform another API call to join the data here because you're only gonna have the owner ID, right? Just the ID of that user, not the actual name. Uh, okay, so I want to show you guys now what is the difference between this endpoint here that we just used to get information, right, for all the workflows? And let me pull up the documentation. So this here, all right, so V3 workflows and the V1 Explorer admin, um, admin V1 workflows here, this one here. So admin V1 workflows, find workflows in Gallery. So you can see here that description, it's pretty much the same, right? But the endpoint here is different. And if you take a look at the sample here, right, the example, it is going to include more information than on the V3. So we can change that to this other one here, admin v1 workflow, right? And then we can get more information, not just like the name of the workflow, the ID, and that like a date or something. So you can do that in here where we build the API call. So here, right? So v3 workflows. I'm gonna change that to that admin v1 workflows. Okay. Let me run. So I encourage everyone here to go onto the documentation and really read what you can get on every endpoint, because there's a lot of there's a lot of endpoints that look similar, but the information that you get, it's a little bit different from each one of them. So you can see here that using this other endpoint, the v1 admin workflows, we were able to get more information for each workflow, right? So you can see here that the number 0 here, right, goes all the way to 31. So a lot of information there around each workflow. Now I can use the filter here to filter by, let's see, the subscription name, right? Because the subscription name will contain the name of the subscription that that workflow is in. The subscription is just like the studio, right? So every user will publish to their own studio, and the studio should have their name in it. And on this case here, the name is not name anymore. It's something else. Let's see. Um, file name, not name. So let me change that to file name. There we go. And then run. We would just need to adjust now the filter here, right, to reflect that latest change that we did. And there you go. So now let's see here. All right. So now we can see here the name of the workflow, the ID, and what is the subscription that holds that workflow. So I can filter by the subscription name now. And let's do that. I'm going to filter here the subscription name. And I'm going to say contains and my name here, Gabriel. So that should get only that one workflow that I have here, right? So remember that my workflow. If I had multiple here, then they would all show up here. All right, so I was able to filter that out here, right? And let's say that we are happy now with this here, and I want to download that workflow. On this case, all the workflows from my studio, right? So all the workflows that I have published. We just need to build the next endpoint based on this information here. So again, another formula tool here. And I'm gonna add a new column, which is gonna be the request URL. So request URL. Again, this is going to be the base URL. Oh, I don't have the base URL here, right? I have that information before in here. So what I could do here is I can either keep that information in here on the cross tab, or I can use the append to get that information. I'm gonna use the append here first because I will also need to include here the bearer token. So let me just grab that, right? So grabbing here from this select here, which includes the base URL and the authorization token. I'm gonna need that in here. So it's gonna be here, the base URL concatenated with the next endpoint. So what is the endpoint now to download a workflow file? So let's look at the API documentation. And then that's gonna be here under workflows. And here, the first one, view one workflows app ID package, right? So that's the endpoint that we want to run next. All right, so back to Alteryx. I'm gonna paste that endpoint there. Remove this. So this is gonna be our endpoint, but here you can see that it is asking for the app ID, right? The app ID, it's actually the ID here that we have within the table, right? So that column called ID, that's what should be included here on the endpoint. So let me insert that in here, concatenate that. There we go. So I have built now the new endpoint, the base URL, view workflows, the ID slash package, according to the documentation. And also I'm already gonna build here the name of the file that I'm gonna create, uh, because I will need that when creating the file later on here, right? And the file that I get from the response of this API call here, it's a YXZP. That's the file extension, YXZP, for the workflow package. And if you take a look here, we have a YXMD under the file name, right? So I'm just gonna change that extension there to the correct one. So we have the information here available when we create the file. So I'm gonna just do a simple replace here of the file name. The target will be the .yxmd, and the replacement will be .yxzp. Okay. Okay, so let me just run this just to show you guys what is going on here. And you're gonna see here the new endpoints, right, that we are creating. Um, there we go. All right, so you can see here the request URL, right? So this is the URL. You can see that the base URL, the endpoint with the ID, right? And the file name here now yxzp. Okay. Now, in order to trigger the next API call, we need again the download tool. So let me grab the download tool one more time here. The URL will be the request URL. Now the output is not going to be string, right? It's going to be a blob because I'm downloading a file. So I need to insert that into a blob field type. Headers, I need the authorization token. So enable that there. And for the payload, it's get, and I don't need to include any other information here on the payload. Okay. All right, so let me run that. So you're going to see now that we're going to have the blob information here on the download data field. So then we can later on save that file on my computer here, right? So let me take a look here. There we go. So now you have here download data and then a number bytes. So this means that I have a file within this field here. To download that, I need to use another tool called blob output, right? So blob, where is it? Here, blob output. Then I just need to set here where I want to save that. So yeah, I can save it wherever I want. So I'm just gonna say here my downloads folder, and then I'm gonna mention here WF dash, right? Just a prefix, and hit save. I'm just gonna change the extension here, remove that .png, don't want that. And I just entered a prefix here because I want to use this option here, append field to file name. And I'm going to use that file name field that I have here to append here, right, on this path that I'm creating. So the file name will be dynamic. For each workflow that I download, it's going to actually contain the name of that file, right, the correct name. And the blob field is the download data, right? So I can run this now. Then this will download that specific workflow on my machine. If I had multiple workflows, right, on my studio, I will download all the workflows that I have there. All right, so you can see here that it was created. And if I open up my Windows here on my downloads folder, you're going to be able to see that. So let me just show you real quick. So you can see here, right? This WF my workflow, this is the workflow that I have within the gallery, and I was able to download that in here on my computer. Okay. All right. So we went all the way here, right? From the authorization to building the first request, filtering out the results, and then building the second request and saving the file on our computer. I mentioned that I would just show you guys here how to do that using the macro here, the server API get, right? It is quite simple. You just need to connect the authorization here to both connections, the input connections on the get. And then the action here, you are going to have a list of all the endpoints, right? So for workflows, you can retrieve all workflow records. The authorization, it is going to automatically grab the correct fields and the payload here. You need a record ID field. So you just need to insert a record ID tool here. There we go, right? Record ID. And that's pretty much it, right? Then you just run this. And the response that you're going to get here under the S anchor will be pretty much the same thing here as you would get using the download tool for that same endpoint, right? Right. So you can see that download data, JSON, right? Then you can just follow the same process here with the JSON parse, so on and so forth. Okay. All right. So let me go back here. This is the process that we just built, right? Get list of workflows, filter out, and then download the workflow file. Some tips here, as I mentioned on the last session, there are C# and JavaScript fully functional samples available in the community. There's also the macros for all the 1.0 and 2.0 requests available in the community. The workflow migration between environments is available in the community as well. And you also have Python libraries available on GitHub if you want to work with Python and the server APIs. Okay, so just to conclude here, this is going to be just a few final slides. These are our offerings related to the Alteryx server. We provide all the assessment and planning. We provide server installation services, server migration and upgrades, and also a server health check. Okay. All right. So that's going to be it for this session. Let me just take a look now at the Q&A. and see if we have any questions. All right, so um, there's one question here about proxy, right? So having some issues with proxy uh, and trying to trigger the API calls. So one thing that I can say about proxy is that if you do use proxy on your company, you need to insert that in Designer. So under user settings, edit user settings, advanced, and then proxy settings, enable proxy credentials, and then you configure that, right? So you need to have that enabled and configured in order to not have any issues within Designer with your company's proxies, okay? And if you're still having issues after doing that, then I would encourage you to contact your IT team and so that they can figure out what is wrong there with the permissions. Okay. Is it possible to run the same request from a third party, not just gallery, to get the data? Yes, it is possible to run API requests from wherever you want, right? So on this case here, this example, it's running from Designer, but you can have an API call being triggered from mm, a website, another application that you have, right? You can embed the API call wherever you want. All you need is that machine that is triggering the API call needs to be able to see uh, the endpoint, right? For the API call. I clicked on the API documentation for my gallery and it states this site cannot be reached. Yeah, so let me just show you that real quick. I think I can replicate that for you. Let's see, because I think on my dev environment here, that occurs. API documentation, right? And it's gonna keep loading, and it's never gonna load. So uh this issue that I'm showing is related to VPN. This is because I am not able to access the URL, right? This URL here, I'm not able to reach that because of VPN. If I connect to my company's VPN, then I will be able to reach that. On your case, that might be the issue, or it might be because the whoever installed your Alteryx server has not properly set up the API endpoint. And then you're gonna see here like localhost slash web API, right? So if you see localhost there, that means that you need to contact the gallery administrator, the server administrator, and mention that, right? That they need to update the URL for the web API address under the Alteryx server system settings. Is the recording will be available? Yes, the recording will be available. Do you have any examples of how these API tools can be used with the overall data ops strategy within an organization? So I don't have any specific examples here that I can provide you. Uh, but what I can point you to is the community, right? So the Alteryx community, you might be able to find some information in there around that specific uh, topic or yeah. So I don't have unfortunately any specific examples here that I can provide around DevOps or anything, but I know that people use that the API calls and everything to do that. It is possible. Okay. All right. So, any other questions, comments? Where is the documentation for the APIs? So, the documentation can be accessed from your gallery, right? So, if you go here, if you log into the gallery and then this question mark, API documentation, that will open this page here with all the endpoints that you can search through. And also you have um, the actual uh, documentation from Alteryx, right? So Alteryx Gallery APIs or server API, right? And then you have here a documentation around the APIs as well. Okay. Um, yeah, thank you. All right. So I don't see any other questions here. So this is our last session. I hope you guys enjoyed all of this journey we went through together. I hope you guys learned more about the Alteryx server and how you can leverage the server to help you on your daily job and your company, right? Um, the recordings will be available for you guys if you want to go back to any other session. And yeah, so that's going to be it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope to see you all soon in the near future. All right. If you have any following questions or anything, feel free to contact us, or you can even add me on LinkedIn as well. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Bye bye.